I thought I was overwhelmed. It was a new PhD program, I had new pressures, but when the strategies that had always worked for me stopped working, I realized that something bigger was going on. And so I went down the journey of getting my autism diagnosed, updated with autism and ADHD. And if you've been on this journey, you know it can be a challenging journey. If you're neurocurious, but you haven't made the journey yet, this video is for you. See, we're going to be talking about what this journey looks like and some of the things that you can expect. Hi, I'm Summer. I'm a keynote speaker and leadership trainer that was late diagnosed with autism and ADHD. I'm also a corporate survivor. I help neurodivergent professionals thrive in workplaces that wasn't built for us. You see, I've worked for the Walt Disney Company, HEB, and even a dude ranch. And now I'm studying for my PhD looking at neurodivergence in the workplace because I believe that organizations need to understand how brains like ours work, lead, and succeed. But we also need to understand. And so that's what this video is about. So let's talk about my autism diagnosis and then my ADHD diagnosis. So I was diagnosed with autism in March of 2024. And it wasn't until April of 2025 that I got my ADHD diagnosis, even though I started that journey in September of 2024. Now, if you were thinking that you might be a late diagnosed autistic or ADHD individual, then there's a couple of things that you need to know as you go down this journey. One, you're looking for psychiatrists that specialize in late diagnosed individuals. If you are a woman, you want to ask the questions, do you work with late diagnosed women? Because the research around late diagnosed women just started coming out in around 2010. It's still relatively new. I found that as I was going through my ADHD diagnosis, I hit a hurdle when the psychiatrist that I was speaking to and trusting didn't have the depth of knowledge that I would have expected somebody who says that they specialize in late diagnoses. And it got to the point where I was having to argue my experience with her. And that was very frustrating, I'm sure on her part, but I know definitively on my part. And I knew it was time to cut the relationship with her when I asked her if I could send her an article of what I was experiencing, and she told me that she wasn't interested in what I had read on Reddit. That was when it was like, okay, you're not a fit for me, because it was an academic, peer-reviewed article from a journal, PubMed. And when I sent it to her, you could tell she was like, oh, okay. And so when you're working with a medical professional, you want somebody who's going to be objective, but also who has your best interest in mind. And you want somebody who is current on the recent research. And so ask these questions when you're considering getting the diagnoses. Also know that for many of us, our insurance isn't going to pay for it. So you may be paying out of pocket. And this can go up to a couple of $1,000s as you do it. So don't assume that an assessment is going to be covered. Make sure you're asking your questions first. The other thing is when you're speaking to assessment centers, ask them, are we just going to sit down and have a conversation? Or do you do actual assessments? If you do those assessments, what do they look like? When I went through the assessment process for the autism, I had assessments that I took on the computer. I had conversations that I did with people, interviews, and then they put me through certain tests to see how my brain works. So they got a full picture of who I was, not just my own experiences. Because what's common is with neurodivergent individuals, we tend to mask or cover up those quirks that we have. So one of my favorite videos that I saw was about getting an individual who is autistic when you're doing autistic assessments to be able to ask the proper questions. And the example they gave was they asked an autistic assessment giver had the conversation with the assessment taker and says, tell me about your socks. And the individual was like, oh yeah, so I have socks. They can only be ankle socks because if they go too high, they're going to hurt my calves. And the seam of the sock has to be like rolled over and tucked in. Otherwise it makes my pinky toe feel weird.
I know when I read that, I felt validated because y'all, I have sock issues as well. They have to be very specific.
And so when you're going through these assessments, a lot of times we take things for granted because we've figured out how to adapt. Whereas it's a lot harder to adapt when they give you a puzzle and tell you to figure it out. They're going to see how you think. So when you're going through, if you're neurocurious and thinking about doing these assessments, ask questions. Don't just take the very first person that says, oh yeah, we've worked with late diagnosed individuals. Ask them, how current are they on the research that's coming out about late diagnosed adults? Can they tell you some of the examples about some differences between late diagnosed adults or diagnosing a child? And then ask what their assessment process looks like. My assessment process took 8 hours. It needs to be more than just a couple of hours here or there. And then talk about cost. Now, one of the things that I learned before I got insurance in my 30s was you can tell them you're going to be paying out of pocket. Do they have a cash rate versus an insurance rate? Many times you'll get a lower cost if you're paying out of pocket if you let them know beforehand. All right. So that is what this video is all about, is really looking and understanding, what does the assessment process look like? What are some of the questions that you need to be asking? And then one final thing when you go through your assessments, when you start considering doing the assessments, I was surprised that how many people, when I told them that I was getting the assessment, made some type of comment or illusion that I was jumping on the bandwagon. I found this frustrating, and I also found I started second guessing myself. Am I doing this because of a bandwagon, or is this a legitimate assessment? Like, what's happening with this? And what I have found through further research is that when we think about neurodivergence, one of the reasons why we're hearing so much about it is because there was a huge population of us that were forgotten. And now that this information is coming out, we're like,
oh, you see me. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not good, but you see me. That's amazing.
And so it's not that it's a bandwagon and everybody's jumping on it. It's there's more information and we're seeing ourselves in that information. It goes back to, you've heard me talk about this. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, way back when, it was not okay to be left-handed. If you were left-handed, chances are you got your knuckle wrapped every time you went to go use your left hand, so you started moving to your right hand. And then all of a sudden it became okay to be left-handed. And the number of left-handed individuals skyrocketed. Now, it wasn't because everybody's like,
oh, this is a cool bandwagon, I'm gonna jump on it, I'm gonna be left-handed.
It was because left-handed people were able to say, I am left-handed. It's the same thing with neurodivergence. It's not that we're jumping on it because it's the cool thing to do. We're jumping on it because we're seeing ourselves in it, and it's finally okay. We're getting tools and resources to be able to do it. And fun fact, being left-handed, you're part of the neurodivergent family. You're welcome and congratulations. All right, now that is it for this week. Thank you very much for joining us this week. And if you were digging this content, then make sure and join us every single Monday. We put out a new video that is focused on the neurospicy workplace. But until then, don't forget, you got this. I'll see you next week.